although the points were mainly small bets, always well attended, I might add, always well attended by dyed-in-the-wool country and horsey people. Shortly after I started, I used to sort of got a bit of a reputation that I would take a bet of some description, and I had one or two customers at the points. One that always sticks in mind is Gay Kindersley, because I always liked him. He was a quite well-to-do type of a guy, but he'd been an amateur rider, Gay Kindersley, a contemporary of the likes of Lord Oaksey. And these people that rode as amateurs, and I got the greatest admiration for these people that want to ride horses, putting their life and limb at risk for absolutely no money. And Gay used to come to the points at Lark Hill and like to bet, and he was always very, very easy to deal with, always affable, took winning and losing in good part. And then a year or two after, when I became a rouse bookmaker, I was on the rouse one day, and a very attractive young lady came and had a bet with me, and I think I asked her, why did you come to me, or what made you, sort me out? And I was down the line at Newbury, it was, and because it was Gay's daughter, Tanya Kindersley, who at that time was studying at Oxford, and she later became an author. But she's a great, although her father's passed away, Gay's passed away, she's also a great, not just a lover of the sport, but very much an animal lover as well. But so fond memories of Gay Kindersley, and Badbury Rings, I had a customer, Johnny Gamble, who'd been a jump jockey. He loved to back short price horses. Biggish money then, £100, £200 bets, which in those days it was a substantial bet. Another character, a nice guy that I got to know. So a lot of characters at those points, and they're all real dyed-in-the-wool aficionados of the sport. If you're going out in January, February, these sort of time of the year, then you must like it. You must like it. It's awful that people laugh at others' misfortune, and you see someone fall over a banana skin and people laugh, and you think, well, why am I laughing? The fella could be lying there with a broken back. But we just do laugh at others' misfortune. I was at Badbury Rings one day, and we used to bet at the top of a sort of a hill, and we parked the cars behind the joints to put the joints up in front of the cars. And behind the cars was this slope, a long slope that went down to the track. At the bottom were bushes and trees, or a few bushes and trees. And it was a long slope. It was probably about 70, 80 yards slope. And we finished the last race and we were packing up. And the guy next to me had a van. I remember it because he had this van, like a sort of a transit van or a comma van. And I had a car. And there were two of them working. There was a guy clerking and another one making a book. I didn't really know him. There was a name I didn't know. I'm packing my gear into the car, and I look and I see this van going down the slope. So I thought, what's he reversing the van down that slope for? When I looked, I saw one of them on the joint doing something, and I saw the other one putting something in a bag. So I thought, well, who's in that van then? So I said to the guy, who's reversing your van down that slope? And he looked round in horror to see his van, and it was all wet, muddy down. It went right to the bottom of this slope, cannoned into a bush, and went sideways and was wedged there. And I left Badbury Rings that day thinking, how the hell is he ever going to get that van up that slope? It seemed an impossibility, and I thought, I hope he hasn't lost today, because that would just about finish him off. And that was an amusing thing to everybody else to watch, except of course the two guys involved. Simon Smith was quite a character, used to make me laugh, and he was a game bookie, a young game bookie, and I like to think I was similar. And I'd been to Badbury Rings for the first point-to-point meeting of the year, and Simon didn't bet at Badbury Rings. It was a very good viewing track, and in the open race there was a horse called Gold Metropolis. I'll never forget it. It had run once an unseated rider, a young horse. Anyway, it was a fairly big price, and there was money for it, which I thought was interesting. So they obviously thought something of this horse. There was money for it, and it ended up a loser in my book. And it would have won a distance. It came to the last about 10 lengths clear and drawing further and further away. And as it got to the last, it was a really unlucky fall. It clipped the top of the fence, and the jockey catapulted out the saddle. And I made a note. I thought, well, next time this runs, wherever it is, it looks a certainty. Anyway, lo and behold, a week or so later, I'm at Lark Hill. Get the runners for the open race, Golden Metropolis. So I thought, oh, this looks like happy days for Mr. Henwood. So start betting on the race, and Simon Smith, who to his credit used to put the prices up, often first before anybody, and up he went 12-1, Gold Metropolis. So straight away before anyone moved a muscle, I shouted out 1,080, Simon, Gold Metropolis. To which he replied, where do you think you are, Mr. Henwood? Royal Ascot, have a 5-40. Which I still thought was very sporting of him. So because I had the 5-40, it collapsed into about 4-1 and duly won. So that was a sort of a success story, as it were. They happened occasionally. But Simon was a good bookie, I thought, and also an amusing character. George Baker was such a funny guy, and we were at Badbury Rings one day, and he hadn't long started, and as I said, he was basically a farmer and a landowner, and there was a 3-runner race, and he was betting 2 joints away, and he marked his board evens 330, which of course is over broke. So as he'd been kind to me and benevolent to me, giving me money when I was behind the 8 ball, I decided I'd be the kind Samaritan and tell him. So I got off the perch. I walked over to George and I said, George, I don't like to poke my nose into a man's business. I said, but you've got over broke on the board. I said, maybe the outside man's giving you the wrong prices. He said, it doesn't matter. He said, I've only got 1 loser. Before I ever had pictures of my own at the race course, before I'd been to Westerham or the Point to Points, I decided I had to learn to clerk and tic-tac, and there was a couple of bookies that used to run a course to get a bit of tea money. They used to run a course in an office in Oxford Street in the evenings. Obviously the office wasn't being used, so they could get it cheaply in the evenings, and they used to advertise in the Evening Standard this course for tic-tac, learn to tic-tac and to clerk. The bookies were a guy from Essex way called Johnny Atkinson. They used to call him Johnny the Liar for self-explanatory reasons. And the other guy was Bernie Levine, who bet as Jolly Joe. Jolly Joe was a fantastic character, a great showman on the stall. I suppose he probably made a book all his life, but he would have spent 3/4 of it operating without any money. But that was more to do with the fact that he was a bit of a small bookie, but a big liver, so he could spend money. Anyway, I went to their course, and it was in a classroom form with a lot of other people. And Johnny Atkinson taught us to clerk, Johnny the Liar, and Bernie taught us to tic-tac. That was the way it went, basically. And at that time, Bernie had his own pitches, and Johnny the Liar used to finance somebody on course, finance another bookmaker on course called Picking, I think it was Picking, George Picking, I think. Anyway, at the end of this course, Bernard, Jolly Joe, and Johnny Atkinson asked me if I would work for them, at the courses odd days, and I said yeah, I would. So I used to work for both of them. It came to Derby Day. The first time I ever met John McCririck was a Derby Day, and because of the business with parking and this sort of stuff, getting to the track and getting back, Jolly Joe's outfit, which was like, we were like 4 or 5 handed on Derby Day because it was busy, 4 handed anyway, and Johnny the Liar's firm, they were 5 handed, so there were 9 of us, and we went in a minibus, and we met at Shepherd's Market. We used to meet Shepherd's Market in Soho, and then we'd go through to Epsom, jumped in the van, jumped in the people carrier minibus at Shepherd's Market, making our way towards Epsom, and they said we got to pick up another member, an outside man for Johnny the Liar on the way. And I said, oh, who is it? So they said, oh, it's a bloke called John McCririck. So I said, who's John McCririck? So I suddenly remembered, I'd seen his name. He was the coursing correspondent in the Sporting Life. So that's a pretty small job because it only works about 3 months of the year, the coursing season. But that's where I'd seen his name. Anyway, I thought no more of it. A bus trundled along. We got to Shepherd's Bush Green, and I was sitting on the inside. I looked out the side window, and I saw an apparition or something. I saw someone dressed in a pink suit. I thought I was seeing things in a pink suit and a huge purple fedora hat. It looked like someone dressed for a pantomime, in my opinion. So I looked out the window and I said to the others inside, I said, look at this funny-looking chap, or words to that effect. You know, where does he think he's going? And the van stopped. He started running towards the van because they all started laughing because he jumped in the van, and it was John McCririck. And that was my first introduction to John McCririck. And then him and I worked quite a few occasions for a bookmaker called, the betting name was Sam Sterling, and his real name was Sam Slivovich. And Johnny the Liar used to finance him. He didn't like betting with his own money. The Liar used to finance him, and John McCririck and I used to either tic-tac or clerk. It was normally John McCririck would start to clerk, and I'd be the outside man. But if he started losing, he would then take exception to that, and then there might be a switch when I'd have to clerk, and John McCririck would be the outside man. And Sam Sterling was quite an interesting character. He had a little hole made in the back of the hod, about the size of a 6-penny piece. And while we were betting on the race, he used to, unbeknown to anybody else, although I saw him do it, he used to roll a 10-shilling note up, like a very thin roll-up, secrete it in the hod, and then while they were running the race and everybody's attention was drawn to watching the race itself, Sam Slivovich used to weed the 10-shilling note that had been rolled up like a roll-up out the back of the hole that he'd had made specially for the purpose in the hod. So he used to get 3 or 4 10-bob notes a day, which were obviously supplement to the money that he would get anyway. And then when they cashed up at the end of the day, because it would be 2 quid or 3 quid short, and no one ever knew why it was short. We used to sometimes spend 15 or 20 minutes looking for it, but in actual fact it had made its way out the back through the little hole in the back. That was Sam Slivovich. I think Johnny Atkinson died quite young. Well, that was my introduction to racecourse bookmaking. And then I liked Bernie. It was a great education working with Bernie. And I started off working for him, and I ended up financing him. I probably would have been better off staying working with him, but I ended up financing. I started off taking a 25p share, which went to 50p share. And then on days when he'd say, oh, I don't want to go there, it's no good, I'd say, well, I'll go and put the money up. And I was sort of gaining experience, I suppose you could say, without it costing me too much money. The staff used to be Jolly Joe, me, and I'm trying to think who the third member was. Ted, his name, I can't think of his surname. And that was the 3 of us that used to go, and it was always interesting. Bernie had a great way of getting float together. He'd go to the races with no money at all. and he used to bet on the daily double. So whereas most bookies start to operate about 15 minutes before the first race, Bernie would start about an hour before the first race betting on this double. Now, he made the double the third and the fifth races, which was quite a good idea because it meant the worst way, you never had to pay anyone out till after the fifth race. And he had this scheme, he had this way of working that was really ingenious. He used to put the two lists of runners on the board, and next to them was an amount of money. It could be £1, £2, £6, £8, depending on the projected SP of the horse. And then the second race had a similar pound notes value attached to each horse. It was like fantasy horse racing, almost like fantasy football. And then if you came up for your 10 bob, your 50p or 10 bob as it was then, 10 bob daily double, you added the two amounts together. So if it was £2 one of them and £7 the other, Bernie used to make this big theatrical thing, it's £2 there and £7 there, and that's £9 for your double, and then you got a ticket for your double and you added over your 50p. But he was a great showman, very theatrical with it all. And because to the rank and file punter, the idea of being able to have a 10 bob double that could possibly come to 15, 20, 30, 40, 50 quid had great appeal. Because the man in the street, it's something that's lost on me, but they, not so much now, but was then, they're always looking, how can they win a lot of money for a small outlay? And so, because this 10 bob daily double of Bernie's was a very good idea, and I have seen him do it as a treble. Well, because what it enabled Bernie to do was to gather a float together for the rest of the day's activities. So by the time 15 minutes before the first race came round, Bernie had a few quid to start to make a book on, which I thought was quite showed initiative anyway. And that was how he used to go on making a book, and that was sort of my introduction to it. So I had plenty of experience of betting without money before I began to do it myself. So I'd seen Bernie do it enough times. Many years later, I was sitting on. I never knew how Bernie worked out the amounts of money that he put against the horse. I can understand you can make a rough guess at it, but he had some sort of formula that he used to come up with, where he could translate the odds into these amounts of money. Many years later, when I was sitting on the board as a board member of the NJPC, they came up with the ingenious idea of selling a daily double. This was trying to promote racecourse bookmaking around about the year 2000, when the NJPC, when the BPA had gone, and the NJPC had started to run things on a more professional manner, I suppose you'd say. And I said, I know somebody that can that knows a way to do this in a good way that'll appeal to the punters. And I rang Bernie. I said, Bernie, that daily double thing you did all those years ago, I said, how did you used to work it? So he started to tell me on the phone, and I'd like to think I'm a reasonably able bookmaker, and for the life of me I couldn't figure out how he was doing it. So in the end he sent me it written, how he used to make this formula to equate the odds to the money, and then I forwarded it to the NJPC, and they tried a daily double, but it never worked anywhere near as good as Bernie's. So following on from that, I then got my own pitches. Normally they give you, when you started, and there was always pitches, but they gave you pitches at places that you shouldn't really have been going if you had any respect for your money. Although I did get a pitch at Goodwood. The first pitch I ever had was Goodwood, the May meeting, but that was more to do with the fact there was about 100 pitches there. So my first venture onto the turf as a licensed track, as it were, was at Goodwood May meeting. And then I got a pitch at Folkestone, outside, not the Silver Ring, outside in the middle of Folkestone, and then I got a pitch at Windsor. Windsor was interested in the Silver Ring. I always remember I remember more the times when things went wrong than the times when things went right. I always think, well, they look after themselves. But I was in the Silver Ring at Windsor the night before Royal Ascot, and betting one side of me was Raymond of Leicester, who styled himself as the Distance King, who was a bit of a character, Raymond, and on the other side of me was Barry Dennis. The three of us were betting in the back line at the Silver Ring at Windsor. And because it was a precursor to Royal Ascot, and I was young and full of enthusiasm, I thought I would use this meeting as a stepping stone to the Royal meeting the next day, when I was going to really show them what proper bookmaking was all about. So I went to Windsor with a few quid. I bet on the first race, the favourite won. I bet on the second race, the favourite run. I bet on the third race, the favourite won, and I bet on the fourth race, and the favourite won. So now I haven't got any money left, and I'm going to struggle to pay out on the fourth race. So I thought, now I'm going to have to indulge in what's known in the trade as snowballing. And what snowballing is when you can't pay out on the fourth race, you now try quickly to take some money on the fifth race, so that you can use the money that you're taking on the fifth race to pay out from the fourth, and you hope with a prayer mat down in front of you that somehow or other the fates shine on you, and the fifth race comes up trumps, and you're not placed in an embarrassing position. So I banged away like a lunatic on the fifth race, which was a sprint handicap with a lot of runners. And lo and behold, it was a tight finish and a 20 to 1 chance on outside. I think it was a 20 to 1 chance to beat the favourite. So I thought, oh, hallelujah. The relief of Mafficking. So now I start to bet on the sixth race with renewed vigour, because I'm now no longer over broke, when over the tannoy they announced there was a steward's inquiry and an objection. So this was worrying, to say the least. So I banged into the last race like a lunatic, and just as the horses were at the post for the last race, the tannoy clicked on and they announced that the fifth race had now been awarded to the favourite. So I was already over broke from race 4. I now haven't got any money to pay out over for race 5. And the sixth race, they put the horses in the stalls, and the favourite won the last race. So as I was running around trying to borrow money, I was bumping into Barry Dennis and Raymond of Leicester, who were trying to do likewise. So I thought, this is going to be a futile exercise, because all the bookies here are skint or flat out, have had bad nights. So I got a little bit lucky. I had a friend of mine who was a sort of a private bookie in Tattersalls. And I ran round into Tattersalls and I managed to find him, and miracles, he had some money on him and he gave me a couple of £100. So I was able to go back and pay out slowly to make sure it just about lasted. So I continued in the smaller rings, and fortunately things must have gone quite well, because I got going and I had a decent run for a year or so, and I had ambitions to move into the big league. I always really wanted to make a book on the rails. I would have taken pictures in Tattersalls, but the rails was really where the big action was, and that's really where I wanted to operate. So I decided to make the move onto the rails, which would introduce me more or less to bigger customers, bigger players, and I just felt I wanted to be where the main action was. But the BPA saw me as a bit of a maverick, I suppose, type character, and they sort of invented a special rule for me at the time, where when I applied for my rails pitches, they told me that I had to have a £10,000 deposit and 2 guarantors of 10,000, and both the guarantors had to be racecourse bookmakers. It's a pretty thankless task if you think about it, guaranteeing another race called Bookmaker for £10,000 because all you can actually do is lose 10,000. You can't make anything out of it. So to actually have to ask someone to guarantee you is not very is not a great idea, not a job you'd want. So anyway, I had the 10,000 for the deposit. Now I had to find the two guarantors. The first guarantor was pretty easy because he's a very, very nice chap and he wouldn't know how to say no to anybody. And his name was Fred Honour, a lovely man, a bookmaker from Burnham in Bucks. And Fred made a book at Slough Dogs and at the races. And Fred had got me a pitch in the meantime at Milton Keynes Dogs, which was my start at licensed tracks. I wouldn't have had the pitch at Milton Keynes if it hadn't been for Freddie Honour, because Freddie Honour spoke to the owners up there, the Young brothers, and Fred recommended me, and on his recommendation only they gave me the pitch. So if that wasn't enough that Fred had done for me, I then asked him to be a guarantor for £10,000, to which he agreed because he was such a nice guy. So I had to find another guarantor, and at that time I was clerking on the rails. On the days when I didn't have pitches, I was clerking for John Banks, who had spent the best part of 2 years off the tracks because he'd been barred for some other business that the jockey club didn't like. And when he came back, I became the clerk. So I was clerking for him on the rails on a daily basis, and John became a great friend of mine. And John was another great character. But he wouldn't have been what we would call Charlie Chuckaway when it came to money. So one day in the car, I said I got some good news and I got some bad news. I said the good news is the BPA are going to give me the rails pitches. To which he looked at me. He didn't actually say anything, but the look said, "Well, you're completely mad. You won't last." And I said, "And the bad news is you're going to be the guarantor." He said, "What do you mean guarantor?" I said, "Well, you've got to guarantee me for 10,000. Well, I can't describe the look on his face. It looked like he had a face like a squeezed grapefruit. Anyway, we got to his house, and I used to park at his house. We lived round the corner from each other in Sunningdale, and we went in and had a cup of tea, and he sort of looked at me and he said, "You know, this is not the piece of cake you might think it." I said, no, I'm definitely going to do it. Anyway, in the end, he signed the paper and sort of threw it at me as if to say, well, I must be mad for signing it. And John Banks became my second guarantor. The guarantors lasted for 12 months. After 12 months, if you behaved yourself and there were no adverse reports from any quarter, then you got the 10,000 back, and the guarantors were relieved of their responsibility. And then, thus, I became a rails bookmaker. The first track I made a book at was Brighton. And after I'd paid the 10,000, I had £1,700 left. That was my float. It was a long time ago, it was 40 years ago. And I went to Brighton with the £1,700. And I'm sure that when I tell you this story, it will sound like someone's making it up. But so I put the flaps over, and they bet 13 or 8 the field, and I thought I'd better make a name for myself somehow or other. So I shouted out 7 to 4 the field. Whereupon the first bet I struck was 7 to 4 to £1,000 to Wayne Heathcote. And he gave me the £1,000, so I was £50 over broke from the very first bet. That sticks in my mind. It sounds like fiction, but that's exactly how it started. And there was a bookmaker betting 3 or 4 joints away called Four Det. His name was Roy Spackman. He bet us 4 Det. So I put the £1,000 in the odd, and while I was thinking about what my next move was going to be, Roy Spackman, suddenly the bookmakers had joined in at 7 to 4. and Royce Backman shouted out 15 who ate the field. So I had 400 quid back with Royce Backman, and I thought this is the way to operate, and off I went, and that was my introduction to betting on the rails that day at Brighton. Which from there I went to various other tracks. The pitches came in sort of slowly. You got 1 or 2, then 2 or 3 more, and 4 or 5, and so on and so forth, until in the end I finished up with a lot of pitches. I did bet as far north as Newcastle. I wanted to see what it was like up there, Aintree on the rails, York. Mainly in the south coast and down into the west. I had pitches everywhere. And I did that for the next 25 years on a daily basis. I used to fly to some of the tracks. By the time I'd got established, I used to do 2, sometimes 3 meetings a day. I would take a light aircraft. I've got 2 airports near where I lived at Sunningdale. I've got Blackbush and the airport at Chertsey. And I would fly from one of those, and then it would enable me to get a plane back to cover a night meeting. Some places you could land on the track, other places you couldn't. Sometimes I'd take a helicopter, which was about double the cost of the fixed wing. But they're dangerous things, and if you fly on them enough times, it will scare you, or you'll pack up doing it, because I think they're a lot more dangerous, and sometimes the people lead you to believe. It caused me to come into contact with the jockeys, because I on one occasion I gave Willie Carson a lift back from Newmarket to Brighton, along with a jockey called Tyrone Williams, who was riding for Rod Simpson, another colourful character. And Willie Carson was riding something for Lord Derby in a handicap with a top weight at 10 stone. But to my eye, it looked a good thing. So while we were in the helicopter flying back from Newmarket, July course, the 3 of us were sitting in the back seat, Willie, Tyrone Williams, myself. I said to Willie, I think this horse of Lord Derby's looks a good thing. He said, no, he said, it's got too much weight. He said, I think the 10 stone will anchor it. So I was taking Tyrone Williams up there for Rod Simpson, who was riding the same race. And Rod Simpson had said to me before I left Newmarket, make sure you're not late, make sure you get him there on time. I said, is it a matter of life or death, Rod? He said, well, I really fancy this horse he's riding. So he was riding in the same race against the horse of Lord Derby's that Willie said to me had too much weight. So I knew Rod was very keen on this thing of Tyrone Williams. So when we got there, I set my stall out accordingly and went all out for the lighter weight that Tyrone Williams rode. And as I say, Willie had advised me that it definitely had too much weight, the Lord Derby horse. And needless to say, as they came up the straight, Willie's went past Tyrone Williams like it was standing still, one hard held. So another moneylender with a weak heart was needed. That was another occasion. So the flying was quite eventful. I flew another time with Willie to Ireland when he won the Irish Derby. The thing I say about Willie Carson, I don't think a tougher individual you'll meet. I mean, he may be small, but he's exceptionally tough, as well as being obviously a first-class jockey. And when I say tough, the day before the Irish Derby, he had been to Newcastle. He'd ridden 5 winners at the Newcastle night meeting and flew the plane back from Newcastle to Oxford. And the next day we took off from Oxford Airport and flew to Ireland, where he rode the winner of the Irish Derby, a filly called Salsabill. And he also rode a 2-year-old for John Dunlop called Time Gentleman that won the Group 2 2-year-old race on the same day. And Pat Ellery flew over the same day. He had a twin engine plane. Willie's only had a single engine, and it was a terrible flight all the way over there with the wind. It was slinging the plane all over the place, and it was a really rough flight on the way there. And on the way back, Willie decided he was going to fly the plane, and he thought it would be quite funny because he knew I was not so much a nervous passenger. We'd had a bad flight, so he thought it'd be a good idea to fly the plane directly at the hangar as we took off. So as we were taking off, he flew it directly at the hangar, and I just started to get panic. I thought, this is the, I could see the pearly gates looming ahead, and I shouted at him, and he pulled the stick up, and it just cleared over the top of this hangar, to which he began to laugh in that typical laugh of Willie's, which he thought was very funny, as did his co-pilot and his wife. Obviously, I thought it was a bit less funny. But anyway, that was Willie. He was tough as anything, and he flew the plane home to Oxford Airport. I always liked Willie. He was quite a character. But like all those Scotsmen, and I include John Banks in that, my other good friend, if you're going to get any money out of them, you generally either need dynamite to put into their wallet or a hammer and chisel at least. Very, very difficult. And Willie's pilot had said to me, Alan Biltcliffe, lovely man, used to be a jet pilot, retired, and flew exclusively for Willie. And he said to me, Willie said, would you like to come to Ireland on Sunday, in his plane? We'll split the cost of the fuel. Well, of course, that sounds a fair idea on the face of it, although what Willie had forgotten about was that when I took him from Newmarket to Brighton in the helicopter, which cost twice as much in any event, there was no mention of the fuel. So I said to Alan Biltcliffe, would you mention to Willie that maybe, does he think that because it's got that big whizzy thing on the top, that the helicopters don't use any fuel? But so there was no mention of the fuel when the shoe was on the other foot. But I like Willie, and I've always found him very, very good company. Willie had landed a good job as first jockey to Hamdan. Hamdan Al Maktoum was riding winner after winner in big races, and as a reward, the Hamdan bought him a brand new Mercedes. He didn't buy me anything, but he bought Willie a brand new Mercedes, and Willie took it to Ascot one day when it was brand. He only had it a day or so, and they had a slightly different handbrake arrangement on the new model. Anyway, he put the car in the car park at Ascot and got out of it, but he didn't put the handbrake on, and the Mercedes ran down the field and smashed into a tree. So that was a good start to the gift of the Mercedes for Willie.